In recent years, more and more climate scientists have slowly been turning from just publishing papers to getting involved in lobbying and activist groups. Today's guest is one such scientist turned activist.
Should science stay passive and informing, or should scientists get onto the streets and make their voices heard? On today's episode of Green Talks.
Welcome to Green Talks, a show run by Green Hub, the sustainability office of the University of Twente. I'm your co-host Clizia.
And I'm Fran. Join us as we delve into the topics of sustainability, circularity, and the energy transition with guest experts leading the way to a greener future.
That's right. So sit back, relax, and enjoy a new episode of Green Talks. Hello, Fran.
Hi, Clizia.
And hello, everyone. Welcome back to Green Talks. Today is our first recording of 2024.
Indeed.
Exciting.
And we have a very special episode ahead, especially considering that 2024 might be the year that we surpass 1.5 degrees as promised by the world's governments. Which is very relevant.
Yeah. Who did you talk to then?
So, because for this interview, I talked to Ernst-Jan Kuiper. He is a climate scientist with a PhD in glaciology that turned to climate activism.
How so?
Well, he joined Extinction Rebellion, Milieudefensie, and other groups, and now they are suing Shell for. Well, he will tell you. He'll tell you exactly.
No spoilers ahead.
No
yeah,
spoilers.
Yeah.
I was thinking, what can I tell? But maybe it's better if I just keep it no spoilers. But we will talk a bit about the relationship between research and activism, and at what point does the science get way too clear to just stay behind and not get involved in activism?
That's what pushed him to start being an activist.
Yeah.
And that's like what we suggest to all our listeners, I guess.
Yeah.
And in the interview, which SDG did you target?
So this interview is very clearly related to SDG 13, climate action, which talks all about addressing the causes and impacts of climate change. Some of the goals are related to reducing damages as much as possible and integrating climate change into national policy and strategy and similar. So climate activists are really pushing for SDG 13.
Let's go. So if all our listeners are ready, we can just jump into the interview.
Let's go. Hello. Here with me is Ernst-Jan Kuiper, a climate scientist, public speaker, and climate activist working with Milieudefensie, Extinction Rebellion, and others. Ernst, thank you so much for your time and welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Before we begin, I have to ask you a question that we ask to all of our guests. What is your most unsustainable guilty pleasure?
I think I would go for eating cheese. I'm a vegetarian, I'm not a vegan, and having cheese every now and then is the main reason, I guess, why I'm not a vegan. So yeah, I think I'll have to go for that one.
Having the podcast in the Netherlands means that this is the most common answer to this question.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know.
No, it's on track for the Netherlands.
Yeah, I guess it's in our genes or whatever, but yeah, I just can't go without.
No, I completely get it. Well, I would like to start with your academic background. Can you tell us a bit about your work and like the bigger state of our climate, considering your research?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so my work, or at least my research, was about the Greenland ice sheet at Utrecht University, by the way. And it was about how the ice deforms within the ice sheet. So, to oversimplify stuff, snow falls on the ice sheet, it compacts and it becomes ice, and then it slowly flows towards the edges of the ice sheet where it either melts or falls in the ocean and drifts away. That's like the natural cycle of ice within the ice sheet. And the way and the speed and the like the way that ice is flowing, that was topic of my PhD research, which I did for just over 5 years. It took me a bit longer than I guess most of us. But yeah, I left academia in the beginning of 2019. Basically for the simple reason that I got so alarmed by all the climate facts that I basically learned during my research that I decided that I wanted to work on a solution one way or another. And I guess the first part of your question was, can I give an update about where climate science is, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Which I more or less forgot. Things are pretty dire, I think. Just to give you an order of magnitude idea, I think about 2 weeks ago, a paper was published in Nature Climate Change, if I remember correctly, that estimated the global carbon budget for 1.5 degrees. And the carbon budget is a simplification of how much CO2 we can still emit as a human society before we hit 1.5 degrees. And the best estimate was that it's in the order of 250 gigatons. And we emit slightly over 40 gigatons a year, which basically means that way before 2030, just 1 or 2 years before 2030, we run out of the carbon budget at current emissions. So by that time, we have 1.5 degrees basically locked into the system. So that's like 5-6 years left at current global emissions. And the main problem is that if we go above 1.5 degrees, we are in the high risk zone of passing certain climate tipping points, which includes melting of the Greenland ice sheet, losing all or at least most of the tropical coral reefs, part of the permafrost in places like Siberia and Canada, and losing the West Antarctic ice sheet. And I think more or less in the same week, a paper was published that estimated that, or at least that concluded that the West Antarctic ice sheet, even if we limit global warming to 1.5 degrees, is basically doomed in the long term, which would mean many meters of sea level rise in the long term already baked into the system. So that's, I think those are just two examples, the carbon budget and the West Antarctic ice sheet that I think tell you quite a lot about the state that we're in.
I remember reading that paper about the West Antarctic ice sheet and just feeling so defeated.
Yeah, I guess you're lucky because you live in Enschede, or at least at this moment in time. But yeah, I think the paper concluded somewhere, I think in the conclusions or whatever, that policymakers should prepare for multiple meters of sea level rise or several meters of sea level rise. Which is what's coming sooner or later. And since this podcast is recorded in the Netherlands, this is, at least in the long term, this is quite a big problem. So yeah, I guess that's a short summary of where we are, at least in terms of climate science.
Well, considering the depth of the problem, what is it that you're currently working on?
At the moment, I'm working for Milieudefensie, as you said in the introduction, which is the Dutch branch of Friends of the Earth. And Milieudefensie sued Shell, at least the formerly Dutch oil major, for not doing enough against climate change. And that was in 2018, if I remember correctly. And then the verdict was in 2021. And the judge ruled mostly in our favor, or at least in Milieudefensie's favor, and ruled that Shell had to reduce its CO2 emissions by net 45% in 2030 compared to 2019, because that's more or less in line with the global average that should be done to at least have some chance of staying below 1.5 degrees. And Shell appealed in 2021, and over slightly a year later, I joined the court case. So that's when I started working for Milieudefensie, which was the summer of 2022. I'm sorry. And now we know that the hearings will be in April, in the beginning of April of next year, so 2024. And then the verdict will probably take another half a year or so. So we're talking about the end of 2024 before the judges will come, hopefully at least to the same conclusion, but we'll see.
Hopefully.
Yeah,
Fingers
exactly.
And what type of work are you working on as a climate scientist in an organization like this? I know we need to be careful in this part of the podcast.
Yeah, exactly. Our lawyers told me not to talk too much about this, but it's mainly to get the climate science right, and also the energy transition reports, mostly of the IPCC, which is the climate science one, and the IEA, the International Energy Agency, to see where developments are going within both the climate science and the energy transition world, so to speak.
And as an activist, you used to work also in organized protests and civil disobedience actions. What can you tell us about those?
Yeah, I'm still doing that, by the way, but just not as often as I used to. So I started my master in 2011, I think, and I finished it in 2014. Then I did 5 years of PhD, and during those, 6, 7, 8 years, I got increasingly more worried about climate change since I was learning more and more about the topic, and in the meantime also being kind of amazed that there seemed to be hardly any concrete measures, or at least not up to the level that they should be, and this continued for a couple of years. And eventually, in the summer of 2018, I decided that I wanted to do more, except for the standard stuff like reducing my own carbon footprint, except for eating cheese. But who knows? And luckily, a couple of months later, Extinction Rebellion was first founded in London, in the UK, I think, and I think in January 2019 it was also founded in the Netherlands. And I basically immediately decided to join, since I had so many years of trying to, first of all, reduce my own carbon footprint, but also being active in all kinds of lobby groups that weren't, at least back then, not achieving a whole lot. And so, my first action was I don't remember exactly, but I think it was February 2019 or March or whatever. And since then, I've been active for Extinction Rebellion in one way or another. Nowadays, it's mostly by giving talks about climate change and joining actions. But I've done other stuff as well. It depends on how much time I have and how much energy.
And some of our listeners might be a bit skeptical of those kinds of actions. We often hear from people claiming that it doesn't work, or it just pushes people away from the cause, it irritates people. What would you say to them?
I understand that. I think the first question I would ask is, what is your alternative? The situation is so severe now. We're so far out of sync with the climate science, with what the climate science is telling us, that only drastic measures are basically enough by now. Now that in itself, of course, is not a validation of these tactics. But I think that if you look at history and think about movements like the suffragettes, the LGBT community, Nelson Mandela, etc., I think these movements were able to achieve major societal change only after they hit the street en masse and protested, and often broke the law, if not always. While most of them, although not all of them, remained non-violent while protesting. I think there are very few exceptions of the of this, like a major societal change that was achieved after lobbying and signing petitions. And when I started to realize that, I was basically immediately sold by these kinds of tactics.
So you say it's necessary and it's the only thing that works.
I'm not sure if it's the only thing that works, because I became convinced that for example court cases can be a critical tool as well. But I think protest and mostly the kind of disruptive, civil disobedient kind of protest might be one of the most important tools that activists have, actually. Yeah, sure.
And can you tell us a bit about your journey from science to activism? Where did it start? At what point? And how did it bring you to like really take action and in a way give up science?
Yeah, for me it was a very slow process. I remember that I watched the documentary of Al Gore in 2006, I think it was, which means that I was 18. And being quite alarmed back then, but a few weeks later, I already forgot about the documentary and basically went on with my life like every puber does at that age. And that was until I started my studies. First, I did a bachelor in geology, where you learn a little bit about climate change, although not too much, and it's mostly it's mostly in a different context. And after I finished my bachelor, I switched to a master in climate physics at the same university. And that's where I actually became quite alarmed. But it was also hard to realize that no one else seemed to care. I mean, this was 2011, 12, 13, 14. You know, it's almost a decade ago. It is a decade ago. And so I still was not really an activist. I think I tried to reduce my own carbon footprint a little bit by that time, but not too much. And it was only during my PhD that I became more convinced that we needed to do more, and I also had a certain responsibility in that sense. And that's when I first, I think it was 2015, I decided to join Utrecht University Fossil Free, which is a sub-branch of the fossil free movement. And we tried to convince, for example, our university to switch to a sustainable bank, to get insight in the fossil fuel, the ties with the fossil fuel companies and the university. And since we have a geology department and a chemistry department, we thought that ties were there. We did all kind of stuff. Try to convince the university to get sustainable diets or sustainable catering in their in the cafeteria. So we with a group of 5, 6, 7 people, we spent actually quite a lot of time on doing this kind of lobby work, signing a petition every now and then, engaging with the sustainability people at the university, and we did that for couple of years, but back then we didn't really achieve a whole lot. I would almost say we didn't achieve anything, because there's just a wall of bureaucracy that you are up against. So over the years, my frustration began to grow, basically until 2018. Because that's when first of all, that's when I already did that kind of stuff for a couple of years, and we didn't achieve a whole lot. But I also went for my PhD research to the Greenland ice sheet on fieldwork in the summer of 2018. And there, being surrounded for 6-7 weeks by other climate scientists, When climate scientists are sitting together over dinner, they talk about science. That's the common field of interest. And I got so depressed after a couple of weeks that I realized that lobbying for change was not enough. I needed to do something more. I just wasn't sure how or when or where. And I just had to, and before I wanted to do more, I had to finish my PhD dissertation, which takes quite a couple of months. So after I came back from the fieldwork, I finished my dissertation, and coincidentally, by that time, Extinction Rebellion was founded, as I said before, and I basically immediately joined. And it's not just, and while I was there, I became more and more convinced of the tactics that they were using. And I also like the fact that the movement, and definitely the people within the movement, spoke with the same urgency and to some extent also the same despair that I felt, which also is quite comforting in that sense, because I felt kind of alone outside my academic circle in dealing with this kind of like major problem. And as I said, since then I've been active for Extinction Rebellion, which is just shy of 5 years now. Yeah, geez, that's a lot.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you were there on the Greenland ice sheet.
Yeah, somewhere in the middle, slightly to the northwest. But
how is that environment? Is it just ice all the way around?
It's ice and snow all the way around. It's actually the most spectacular thing is landing on the Greenland ice sheet and flying over it. Because once you're landed, it's just a desert of snow. And if I looked at the map, I think in a 500 kilometer radius there was nothing except for snow, and then 500 kilometers to the west, that's where the coast started. So yeah, it was, and yeah, you're completely isolated in a camp. Yeah, it was by far the most amazing experience of my life. And we also worked quite hard, by the way, 6.5 days a week. Yeah, because there's nothing else to do except for eating and sleeping and working. And Saturday night was party night, and then Sunday we started just after lunch with work again. So I think Sunday morning was your time off.
Party night being where people talk about climate science between themselves.
Yeah, we also partied a bit. And
how deep was the ice there?
If I remember correctly, 2,500 meters and 50, I think, something like that.
2.5 kilometers.
2.5 kilometers of ice below your feet. Yeah. I also noticed when we landed that the air is quite thin there, which the first couple of days I was struggling with quite a bit, actually. But yeah, that was also something that was in the back of my mind all the time. You know, we know from the climate science that the Greenland ice sheet has a tipping point. We just aren't sure exactly where. It's probably in the order of 1.5 or 2 degrees of global warming, which basically means that the whole thickness of the ice sheet will melt eventually if we cannot get a grip of climate change, which was in the back of my mind quite often there, because it seems so vast and so untouchable almost. But if we let this thing run out of control, it will melt eventually. And actually the groups after me in that camp had difficulty landing and getting off the ice sheet because it was melting. And when the ice sheet starts to melt, then the plane cannot take off because the ice gets too sticky. So they had to stay there for a couple of more days waiting for the ice to freeze again.
Wow.
Yeah, I was lucky in that sense. I could get off the ice sheet as planned.
Wow. Well, in this kind of last section, we're approaching the end of the talk. I would like to ask you a personal question, because recently you became a father. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And I was wondering, how does that impact one's view of the future of our climate, and does it influence your activism?
Yeah, I became a father, if I counted correctly, 11 weeks ago. Well, something like that, just shy of 3 months. It did change my activism in the sense that I have less time. So I attended one action since, and that's it. So in that sense, it did change my level of activism, or my level of involvement at least. Yeah, it's a hard question. I get this question quite often. I never really know how to answer it. On a personal note, I'm very happy that I was born in the Netherlands, and so is my son. Because we will get some serious problems with climate change, especially in the long term with sea level rise. But we are not the most vulnerable country or community to climate change. At the end of the day, we will have enough food in the Netherlands for now at least the next couple of decades, which is not the case for people in the global south, or at least for many of them. So that's something. I'm not sure if glad is the right word, but I'm very relieved with. But yeah, maybe I've all this bad news coming from the climate science community. Maybe it touches me even more than it used to, but I'm not sure. The interval's too short to tell, I guess. But maybe I also don't want to think about it too much.
That's fair.
Yeah, like most people do, by the way. But
well, the last question, basically, what is your main takeaway for our listeners?
I think I'm gonna quote my favorite climate scientist here, Kevin Anderson, and he often ends his talks with, "We either implement radical climate policy or we get radical climate change." Those are the only two options that are left after basically 30 years of doing nothing or next to nothing. And it's up to us which one we choose. And I choose radical climate policy because I'm damn afraid of radical climate change.
Yeah, understandable. Well, thank you very much. It was a very insightful interview, and I hope we get a chance to meet you again on the podcast. Until then, that was Green Talks, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. If you would like to stay updated on all new episodes, make sure to subscribe to Green Talks on your favorite podcasting platform, whether it's Spotify, Google Podcasts, Deezer, or more.
You can also find video versions of the podcast on YouTube. We are your hosts. I'm Clizia.
And Fran.
Ramon Alfadel is helping us behind the scenes with preparations and research. Melania Ardelan is our editor. The show is organized by Green Hub, the sustainability office at the University of Twente in Enschede, Netherlands. See you in the next episode of Green Talks.